I heard you on your interview with the Ayn Rand Institute, and you had some really interesting things to say there. I think she's relevant for our discussion because Ayn Rand is someone who really looked at pathological altruism on a societal level, right? When an entire country, an entire culture is taken with this kind of possessed by pathological altruism, and this doctrine is really policed, as she shows it in Atlas Shrugged, of political correctness and, caring for the people and the good of the public and all of these beautiful sayings. But you see that behind the guise of compassion is very power hungry individuals, vulnerable narcissists, to put it mildly. But she has a really, really great way of showing where pathological altruism, where empathy goes too far. One of the criticisms of her work, which I think is warranted because I do think she had some blind spots, but that is her whole philosophy of self-interest. And I think that her only mistake here was really how she defined the self and what self-interest is exactly. But I do think that the world is in order when we live in a society where we are free to pursue our self-interest. And I think that that self-interest, the way I look at it, is self with a capital S. It's a self-actualization. It's a individuation, to use a Jungian term. But it's this ability to invest in ourself right now, in ourself in the future, that collection of selves, and also to be able to invest in our people, to be able and to be free, to be altruistic towards those people that we love. And I think she doesn't talk about this enough. She was kind of an avoidant personality. So her heroes and her characters are always very individualistic. But I think that if you integrate that sense of, chosen community within that
Mhm.
self-interest, if you
Mhm.
have that, I think she's really, really onto something. So tell us a little bit about what you think of Ayn Rand, her history, and how her work has influenced your research on pathological altruism.
It's quite interesting. You bring up so many wonderful ideas that these thoughts flash through like dozens of thoughts. And I'm like, oh no, I've got to jot that down. And when you get right down to it, um, sometimes what I find is that those who follow Ayn Rand, and well, before we go into that, even if you look at Marxism as a doctrine, it is a really wonderful sounding doctrine. And I mean, it sounds great. And this is why I think a lot of young people are attracted to it.
It's a powerful tool in that sense, absolutely.
And what it is it's a tool for those who are narcissistic because it doesn't build into the structure of understanding human relations the idea that some people um, are narcissistic and and narcissism isn't all bad. There's some very good aspects, and there are narcissists who are also really good people. But there can be sort of malignant narcissists who are very much into um, taking advantage of others. And that's not built into the structure of understanding the world through Marxism, through communism. And so what happens is those countries that build societies that don't um, take into account the fact that people really differ in what they're going to um, try to pull out of other people and what they're going to do for other people. Some people are givers, some people are takers, many people are a combination. But if the structure doesn't take into account any of that and just assumes that everybody is equally, benevolent, then you have a perfect structure for a narcissist, a malignant narcissist, to begin climbing their way up to the top. All they need to do is to portray themselves as actually doing good for other people. You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs and so forth. So I think, y- so, so with that as context, when you look at Ayn Rand's work, it's really she was quite um, she was really admirable for her ability to see through the facade of altruism that was behind um, a lot of the activities that were in the Soviet Union and in communist countries. Uh, it's not as if everybody who was on board with communism was, uh, a malignant narcissism because a narcissist because they weren't at all. I met people who were true believers, absolutely good people, and they were treated to good by the system. It's just that um, eh, their fact base of what the real world was like was deeply warped by the fact that communism can shape what kind of facts about the real world that you can receive. So, for example, when Mao was in China, um, people would escape from the communist, held regions, and they would try to warn people about what was actually happening. And because it was like a black hole of information, you didn't really know because the communists didn't allow that information to get out. And people just wouldn't believe them. It's like nobody would be doing this kind of thing. It's crazy. Yeah, they just would not believe that was what was going on. And when you can control the news media, you can get people on board with your agenda who are really good people because they just don't have access to anything that falsifies what you're promulgating. So,
Right.
Rand was amazing in her ability to kind of see through all of this and um, you know, to try to escape it and then to fight against it. Um, but at the same time, she herself I mean, there's pretty substantial evidence. I wrote this in a post on a Nori blog many years ago, but there's substantive evidence that she was a narcissist of the first order. And this probably helped her to be able to be strong enough to stick to her convictions. But it also meant that she um, kind of believed herself overall. Everything was going on. So if she wanted to, um, have an affair with someone else, then she could easily convince someone else that, for like her husband, that yeah, to just fine to have affairs with other people. And if she, and even when she had, was in the hospital and had, sort of, the medication, um, led her to hallucinations and so forth. And she insisted that it had to have been real because she saw it with her own eyes, and no one could convince her anything different. And so one of her former best friends was putting it, there's no way to relate how crazy she actually was, in many ways. So I think there's many brilliant writers who are also crazy in many ways. So she's probably no different there. But it's important to be aware um, that when she's talking about things like altruism, it was really her way or the highway, and that wasn't something that she discussed and had reflected the opinions of others. That was just how she felt it was the way it was, and it's problematic.
I think that all great writers have a little crazy in them. The line between madness and genius, is a very thin line. But I think it's important to know that she had this personality because a lot of people who follow her work, they kind of make her to be a guru. And she's a human being, and all human beings have faults. And she had many, many very good qualities. And her books are brilliant. And I don't think it's an accident that they're so transformative for people. They were for me. But I think it's important to know just that she was very, very individualistic. When we say narcissism, we're basically saying she was on the extreme end of being aware of self, and caring of self, and others weren't really able to come through. And I think that she was a very unique person, and that dialogue between, the West and communism, she was able to see the writing on the wall. With that said, I
Mhm.
think that her philosophy of self-interest is incomplete in the way that she defined it. Although if you look at it as the self, as something that's a little bit more expansive than momentary gratification or the freedom to pursue every whim, but that this is, more expansive throughout time kind of a self, and the ability and the freedom to pursue your needs and to pursue your community without having that social policing of pathological altruism here, which basically what Marxism is able to do, it's able to manipulate you because it's hiding behind the guise of compassion, behind the guise of, public good. And I think being able to see that is really important, because a lot of our policies today are driven by this fundamental axiom that sits at the bottom of Marxism, where, to be selfless is the best, it's the highest good. And this also assumption that human nature is perfectible. And I think, your comment on how Marxism doesn't take into account human nature, a personality, variability, and the fact that there are people who are going to game the system.